Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
You are listening to episode 66, and we have a great interview for you today. Hilary welcomes theater practitioner, museum creator, producer, and writer Jolie Booth to discuss theater and creativity as a spiritual path. Jolie details her journey into theater and fooling, beginning with a near-death experience as a child, and discusses the fool archetype and its role in speaking uncomfortable truths. She shares her experiences conducting question-based circle plays designed to merge the inner and outer infinities, and speaks about the power of group ceremony and the relationship between creation and destruction. She then shares her personal experience with infertility and suicidal depression and finding healing through two very different ayahuasca ceremonies. And they close by discussing the play she recently wrote about three women accused of witchcraft that she performs in locations around the UK where accused witches were actually tortured and executed. And before I tell you more about Jolie, I just want to say that this episode was such a treat to edit because Jolie's really intense and inspiring stories and conceptual explanations were just so rich and fascinating. I was in tears several times while listening because of how closely these topics touch what I've been thinking about personally this week. And they cover tons and tons of interesting things, from a near-death experience to cosmic orgasms, from therapeutic theater to reality as a simulation. So I'm so excited for you all to hear this one. And about Jolie. She began her creative career working at an award-winning Tudor reenactment called Kentwell Hall. In 2003, she established Kriya Arts, a cutting-edge arts and production company whose aim is to make the world a more compassionate and extraordinary place. In 2008, she began working with the world-famous fool Jonathan Kay as his director of fooling, and then trained and performed with him, living on the road touring the UK and Europe for 7 years. Together, they created the Nomadic Academy for Fools. From 2012 onward, Jolie produced and performed in many award-winning fringe theater shows, including Backstage in Biscuitland by Tourette's Hero, Testosterone for Rum and Clay and Kit Redstone, her own one-woman show HIP, and has just returned from touring her new play Sisterhood. She's the co-creator and director of a pop-up museum called the Museum of Ordinary People, and in the last few years has had 3 novels published: The Girl Who Ruled the World, Never Worn, and to go with the play, Sisterhood the Novel. You can connect with her on Patreon, where she supports and nurtures people's creativity, and that's patreon.com/JolieBooth, JolieBooth. And her website is kriyaarts.co.uk, and that's KRIYAARTS.co.uk. Enjoy the episode.
Jolie, thank you so much for joining me today on the Intentionist podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I want to talk to you today about theater as a spiritual path. I know that you're a playwright, author, actress, producer. And the thing that really drew me to the work that you're doing was our connection on Instagram when you were talking about the concept of fooling. And I'd never heard of this before. And I thought our listeners might think it was really a cool thing. So could you please explain a little bit about your background and, how you got involved in theater as a spiritual path?
Yeah, so it goes quite far back. So when I was 10 years old, I started working at a Tudor reenactment where we all live as 15th, 16th century people. And the public pays to come and see as if it's living history. But we stay in character, so we do everything in first person. And it's one of the only reenactments that does that. So we were completely immersed in this Tudor life as if we were living then. And I, at one point, jumped into a fish pond and nearly drowned. And the experience was quite profound for 2 reasons. One, I knew before I jumped in that I shouldn't jump in. So there was an instinctual feeling that I had that was telling me not to jump, even though I'd been jumping in all day. And when I did jump in, my smock that I was swimming in went over my head and pulled me under. And when I tried to wrestle myself free of it, I realized I couldn't, and that I was running out of air, and that I didn't know where the bottom was anymore. And I let myself float to the surface. And as I did so, I saw an old man in medieval clothes jump in to save me. And I remember thinking, I hope he's going to be okay, because he was like covered in thick woolen gowns and things. And then when I finally came to, I had mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and came to on the banks of the pond, and was taken off somewhere. It was quite full on. I came to like completely naked and surrounded by loads of schoolboys, which was really horrible.
Oh my gosh.
But when I then was introduced to the person who'd saved me, it was a visitor who jumped in jeans and a t-shirt behind me, and not an old man in medieval clothes. So I asked where the old man was, and he didn't exist.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, like I definitely saw him, because I even felt the water move when he jumped in. So that happened. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I was into Nirvana. I'd become really alternative. I had like hennaed hair and stuff. And this guy had found out.
Yes, the 90s were a great time.
Exactly. So much fun. And this guy who was a beekeeper, who was a pagan, found out what had happened to me. And he came up to me and he said, do you know that you found the shamanic path? Like, you've had a near-death experience. You've met someone from the afterlife. They came to save you, and like basically that's the shamanic path. And I didn't know, I hadn't heard anything about any of that before, and it completely, like, I just thought it sounded like the coolest thing ever. I was like, great, like, I love that. And because I've been brought up a born again Christian by really beautifully hippie, lovely Christian parents. Like, they were very, my mum believed that God was in the fields, not in a church. Like, they were very pagan with it to an extent.
Open-minded.
Yeah, open-minded, and just lovely as well. There was no oppression involved in it at all, and they didn't force it on me in any way. But I had grown up with that. And so when I heard this thing about a shamanic path, I just became really interested in it. I'd already lost my faith by that point in the Christian religion.
At 10? Is that what you said?
So I was about 13, 14 by this point, and I was starting to kind of question it. And I was into more alternative stuff.
That's really the time that a lot of people, it's interesting that 14 years old, you know, the church that I grew up in, there was the main leader had his big faith crisis at 14. And, that seems to be an age where a lot of kids, I think even for myself, that was the time where I got really serious about what is it that I believe? It's an interesting moment.
Well, it's interesting because it's the 7-year chapter thing. So I'll come back to this again. But the 7 for me, like, because there's Saturn returns at 28, but for me, each 7 years is a really profound chapter. And so, 14 was a big one. But also my parents had split up. And my dad went off with my drama teacher. And so when I asked him, like, I remember looking him in the eye and being like, well, so if you were married in the eyes of God, and you're with mum in the eyes of God, what's going to happen when you die? Like, who are you going to be with in heaven? And I just remember his face, and then me just thinking, basically, this all just kind of is made to fit around whatever works for you, really. And it was that moment of like, okay, this is all made up. It just sort of had a light on moment where I was like, it's
very convenient, right?
It was convenient. And and there was that real feeling of like, okay, so not only have I lost my family and my kind of nucleus family safety, but I've also now lost my eternal paradise. So thanks Dad.
Oh gosh.
So that was a moment. Yes. But so all of that had kind of been happening around that time, and that's when this guy came up and told me about the shamanic path, and I was interested in it from then on. I was interested in exploring mind-altering states a lot from about the age of 14. That became something I was interested in. And I was always interested in theatre. But then there was a point when I was about 20 where I met this incredible woman called Andrea Brooks, who's been my mentor. It was when I first moved to Brighton, where I live now. And it was actually through being on social benefits, because we had a socialist government at the time. They gave me her as a mentor. So I said, I want to work in theatre. And they set me up with this incredible woman as a mentor, which was amazing. And she's been in my life ever since. And she sat down with me and just wrote out this page of stuff about like, oh, you should do this, this, and this, after I kind of told her what I was into and what interested me. And at the time I was doing stand-up comedy. And she told me about clowning and fooling, because I was saying I'm enjoying doing stand-up comedy, but I just feel it's quite aggressive and quite masculine. And I want to be a bit more emotional with it. And she said, well, you should look at clowning. And so she put me in touch with a woman called Angela de Castro, who's an incredible clown teacher. She's Brazilian, but has been in England, in the UK for a long time. And I did some work with her and she was amazing. But then she also told me about this man called Jonathan Kay, who was a fool. And I just, around the same time, met his daughter and became friends with his daughter. And he was looking for someone to take on his kind of admin work. And she suggested me and he asked me to come and work for him. So I was like 22 by this point. And I ended up working with him as a director of fooling, which was just this wonderful title that he gave to me, which basically meant I was doing the admin. But it was like, you have a special title. And he gave me a clapped out computer and there was no money for the first few years. It was like something I had to kind of generate whilst working with him. And we started off by touring his work. And then as we got going, we created an academy where we taught people his fooling technique. And then off the back of that, I started training with him as well. And I now teach at the academy that still exists today.
And what exactly was his fooling technique? Like, what does that even mean for people who aren't familiar with theater terms or even the concept of playing the fool?
Yeah, I mean, no one really knows about fooling. And the thing that's so extraordinary about it is the oldest direct lineage to the medicine man from, it's the oldest form of performing. And I think it's really interesting that it slips through the gaps because in terms of the tarot and the fool archetype, it's the unknown. And so it's the kind of oldest, most raw type of performing there is. And yet it's the least springs to mind, understood practice. So I think we all know about the fool in Shakespeare. So you'll have like a wise fool who plays the fool. You used to have innocent fools and wise fools. Innocent fools were people who maybe, quite often people with Down syndrome or, dwarfism or something that the rich found sweet and entertaining, and they would have them as their fools, and they would be innocent fools. And then the wise fools were people that were playing the fool, that knew what they were doing and were able to not be punished because the way they did it was in a really open, kind of innocent way, which meant that the king didn't take offense to it.
So they could say the things that
no one else would. Yeah, the things that no one else would say.
Yeah. Okay.
And the king needed that because everyone else was so pampering to them the whole time. They wanted to hear truth. So the fool in a theatre practice is telling truths to the audience because we're kind of all kings these days. We're all being told what we need to hear and we're all, being stroked and pandered to by marketing to, go and buy these things. And, everything's made to make us feel comfortable and kings of our dominion. And so actually to have a fool come and slightly jab you a little bit and just question the reality that you think is true because you've invested so much in it. But you can only do that if you're coming from a really open place. If you're doing it with your guard up or hiding or lying to yourself, then the audience aren't interested. So you have to do a lot of personal work on being able to be open in order to be able to approach this in a way that will be accepted by the audience.
So fascinating. And I know too that the fool is oftentimes it's the beginning of the journey. It's where when we start out in innocence and like you said, there's the innocent fool and the wise fool. I love that there's those two within.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about the circle plays that you're a part of. Can you explain what that is? And then how does it provide healing for the participants as well as the audience?
So the circle is really vital to the fool. And again, that's the 0 on the tarot deck. So the idea of the circle is that it's everything, and everything includes the inner world. So we have the outer world, we have this infinite universe that goes on forever outside, but we also have an infinite universe going on inside of us as well. And when we're walking around in our everyday lives, that 0 is actually twisted in the middle and it makes the infinity sign. So that twist is you. You're the guardian and gatekeeper of your inner world merging with your outer world. And when we're creating stuff, like any kind of creativity, writing, performing, whatever it is that you're doing, you're trying to bring your inner and outer together. So if you imagine there's a circle in front of you and then there's a circle behind you, you're trying to flip the one behind you over you to be in front of you, and you're trying to bring your inner world out so people can see it, and you're trying to untwist that twist so it's one circle and not two circles joined in the middle. So
I love that imagery. I've never thought of it like that.
Yeah, and that twist is your inner critic. So there's a gatekeeper within you that's stopping you from letting this stuff just splurge out all the time. You used to, as a child, you were just a circle. And then something happens at some point in your life that makes you twist. And it's normally something that makes you realize you're separate in some way. And it's kind of your first scar.
Yes.
And then that will twist you. And then from then on, you keep your inner world sort of as a secret. So when you do a circle play, you're trying to flip that circle in front of you. You're trying to bring your inner world to the fore so that people can see you exploring it. Mainly it's healing for you, but it's also so powerful for anyone witnessing it. We call it witnessing because and normally an audience, you'd want them to react in some way. You'd want them to laugh or clap or give you some sort of reaction. Whereas when you're holding a space for a circle play, you're asked not to react, because we're not performing for you. We're performing for ourselves, really, to open up and keep exploring our inner world. But you are witnessing and you're holding, and you're going to be getting something from it, but it's not about you as the audience.
When we spoke before, you had mentioned that you take how does it work in terms of just mechanics? Is it all improvisation? Is there a script? How does that all work?
So the interesting thing about the mechanics is your armor more than anything. So logistically, you'll sit down in a circle. We'll spend the day going around and asking everyone what question they want to ask. So it's quest eye on. What quest are you going on into your inner world? So you'll ask a question. So for example, someone might say, why am I not in my throne of power? But normally your question is going to be twisted, because everything in the outer world is twisted slightly. So we all work with each other. I mean, normally it was Jonathan who we were working with at the time, but people have started to run the circle plays within the group as well now. So we're starting to do it ourselves. But Jonathan would say, okay, so who's in your seat of power? And he'd kind of work through it with you until something really hit, like a resonant sort of emotional bell. And with this question in particular, this was someone's question. And when he said, well, who's in your seat of power? They were like, I don't know. That's what I need to find out. So they then went on a quest to find out who was sitting on that throne of power in the center of their inner world. And so we'll do that. We'll wait until we've kind of untwisted everybody's question and it really is resonating for each person.
So instead of when I hear you say that, it makes me think of, when you do shamanic journeying, or if you've ever done past life regression, or, any sort of guided meditation where you allow your mind to go where it needs to go to kind of find where the answer is.
Yeah.
But you're doing it in a collaborative way where you're using actual other people as part of the mirroring process. It's really fascinating to me in terms of therapeutic possibilities.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like it's ancient. It feels like this is what we used to do as communities. Because this is what, and harking back to your first question, you were saying what's, this lineage of fooling and how it's as old as us, basically us having consciousness. So the moment we became conscious and we started fearing death, we had anxiety and we wanted to know how to beat death. And so if people did beat death, they went for a fever or they got ill and then they survived, everyone would want to know how they did that. And you would find it really difficult to explain, because it would be hallucinations. It would be, you can't really explain the unexplainable, because the inner world doesn't have language. It's the outer world that has words. So there's no words for the inner world, and that's why we have art. And so all art and creativity came from our anxiety and our fear of death, and us trying to work out how to beat it, play with it, explore it, deal with the feelings of grief. All of these things we couldn't have words for, so we had to find other ways of expressing it. And in really right back to the earliest markings of man, they were in places where there's amazing acoustics, like cave paintings. They only recently realized that places where there's cave paintings have amazing acoustics, and they started to notice that there were bones with holes in them, and that there were rudimentary musical instruments in a lot of these places as well. So they think that they would paint these places whilst also making music or singing there, and that there would be spaces where performance would happen. And the performances at first were trying to express what had happened, but after a while they then became magical rites in their own right, and people found them as healing. And the whole thing of show business today is still like someone meets their favorite pop star and they think that they're healed, or, it's the whole magic of show business is that people find it healing and cathartic. So it's still there. The magic is still absolutely there in Hollywood and pop stars and everything.
Well, and you can kind of see too how the shadow of it gets thwarted, because it's so, in some ways, I think that there's an element of like shying away from making it too overtly spiritual.
Yeah.
But just through the act of storytelling, and that just, there is always medicine in that mythical and archetypal language. I've never heard anyone explain it so beautifully, Jolie. That was just like a treat to hear you explain it like that. It's beautiful. So then what are some tools that people can take away from this in terms of, so this sounds amazing. I'm dying to experience a circle play.
Yeah.
It's kind of, like you said, not a lot of people know about fooling. This is something that is probably more of, I wouldn't say like an underground practice, because it's obviously out in the open, but it's something that's little known and probably not practiced very much. So then what could people do to experience this for themselves, or how can they access it aside from attending a play? Is there something that they can use to incorporate into their life?
I mean, I think in general, ceremony for I think people taking the step to start physically doing things in groups, because I know I'm a practicing witch. I wouldn't necessarily say Wicca, because I don't particularly prescribe to anything in general, but I, a year ago, started to meet up with my friends and hold ceremonies. So we created a coven together and we started to hold ceremonies together. And I think that physically getting up and doing it is a big step. I think doing stuff on your own is brilliant, but when you start to do things in groups, it becomes so much more powerful. And you could hold a circle play together. There's nothing stopping you. The way that we do it and how far we go with it is, it's all just made up. Everything's made up. I think that's the thing with creativity in general. Spirituality got sort of stolen from what these people were doing back in the day, which was just acts of creation, and then was given over to religion. But like ancient Greece, for example, people would speak as gods and would channel archetypes through them, and people would hear them as channels for the archetypes, and that was completely reasonable. People didn't need it to be put somewhere else in another building called a church. It could just be in the amphitheater with people there doing it.
Right.
And for me, creativity is my religion more than anything else. I think when you're in an act of creation, which also does include destruction, like it's all part of the same. You can't have just endless creativity. You need destructive winter time as well. So they kind of go together, they're symbiotic. And for me, like, it's a beautiful thing to write a Bible. It's a beautiful thing to build a cathedral. But when you're still fixated on it thousands of years later and killing people over it, that's when it's a problem. So,
well, yeah, that's the big part, right? People are being harmed over it and marginalized, and yes,
just people being obsessed with the fixed thing after it's been made. So, like, part of me is like, oh, it's really difficult training to do the circle play, and like we've spent years doing fooling and stuff. And then at the same time, it's like, yeah, but literally you could just go and do it. You can hold a circle and create a safe space where you agree that you're not going to break it. You have to really think about how you will look after each other when you go in there and do it.
So Jolie, when you create the workbook for people to do this, come back on our show so we can let the whole world know about it, because that's something that I think would be amazing, because there's so many people doing cacao circles and women's circles that this is the kind of exercise that could be really interesting to bring into that sort of space, because I'm seeing a lot more of that, where people are using movement and dance and in ways that they haven't been before. I even think with exercise and stuff, I think, and yoga for that matter, a lot of people use yoga just and I know I'm guilty of this, where it's like, I need to work out, so I'm just going to do yoga because I like it for that reason. But there's so much more going on, and you get the benefits by just participating. But now we're starting to see, and obviously there's yoga schools where you can go and learn more of the mysticism behind it. But yeah, we're seeing more acts of creation in regular old like health club spaces. I think, so it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we're actually kind of ready for this sort of work now, because I think, when you go and meditate, for example, if you do a Vipassana where you meditate for 10 days, you can feel yourself unprogramming all of the time you spend on your smartphone looking at social media, where you're basically stroking your ego and, doing negative stuff to yourself. Yeah. And then you go and meditate and you can feel what it feels like to be unprogramming that. But with the fooling, it's so intensely doing that, because you're also having to stand up in front of people. You know, the whole thing of like, as soon as you observe atoms, they behave differently. Theatre is people observing you trying to do stuff. Like suddenly just picking up a glass and drinking a glass of water becomes really difficult when people are observing you. And it feels like all the atoms in your body are going crazy because you're being observed. And I genuinely believe that we're in some sort of simulation theatre bubble. You know, it's like we've got theatre within theatre within theatre. I genuinely believe that in some way we're being observed, which is why we feel kind of anxious and weird the whole time, because actually we are in a show of some sort. We're in some sort of play.
We're in some sort of simulation.
Yeah, and we're being observed. And so there is this feeling of always like watching yourself.
Yes. And well, I even think back to when I was a kid, and you know, it's hard. I'm in the process of kind of deconstructing my own beliefs from growing up and now. And I've been thinking a lot about my childhood. And I remember as a kid always feeling like I was being watched. Yeah. And I didn't know if that was because, you know, you hear about spirits and you're taught about the devil. I mean, I was raised Mormon, which is a branch of Christianity. And so I just always remember thinking like people from the other side are watching me, and there's things going on that I don't know. And I didn't have a language for it. And I think, you know, is that intuition? Is that just projection from some other, you know, fear-based belief system to make me feel afraid or uncomfortable, or to just make sure that I'm trying to be perfect all the time, you know, just those ideas. But when you say, I feel like we're in some sort of a simulation, I'm like, I get what you're saying there. Like from that experience, but then even, you know, and then there's like the maturity aspect of it, where when you do, you know, work in shamanic realms, that you get the sense that there is so much more going on at different vibrational levels than what we can see and feel and touch with our logical mind and our physical reality. So
yeah, I mean, there's so much going on, and it's so wonderful. You know, it's like, I feel like religion and all the different stories that we come up with are just brilliant, and none of them probably are anywhere near the mark. You know, we're literally just grappling around in the dark, and it's hilarious. And I just think as long as we don't get fixated on anything and hurt other people over anything, then we should be allowed to just literally come up with whatever we want. You know, it's a playground. We're in an incredible playground where we can make up any theatre we want, and we shouldn't take it so seriously, and we shouldn't be hurting people over it. And I just think that
absolutely,
that's what creativity is for me. Creativity is just this place where you can be and say and do anything, and it's safe because it's not real. It's all fun because it's not real.
Yeah.
So then you can write whatever you want.
I like that. And on the flip side, it's like there's an element that it's all real. Right. I mean, if we're getting all philosophical, it's like it's not real, but then it's like, what's more real?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Is it what I'm creating in this moment, or is it the reality outside of it? So,
yeah. And none of, you know, because you look at history, you know, what was real for the Romans, which was still real, is completely different for us now. You know, I think that was the thing growing up in this Tudor reenactment and being like a poor person there and just living in this, you know, I still work there now. So I've worked there 30 years. Every summer for a week or 2 weeks or a weekend, I'll be there and I'll live in this world. And my brother met his wife there, and we've now got a 1-year-old niece who, you know, came there this year for the first time. And just, we've literally have families who've grown up there and who know each other. And it's this whole other reality that I live in my own life. But I'm also, while I'm there, imagining what the reality was like for the people who lived 500 years ago. And that was real. You know, they would have killed people over how real whatever they thought was happening was. And yet we're living in a completely different reality. And it, you know, it is theatre. And then the idea of parallel universes, you know, it's not out there somewhere. Like, you live in a completely different universe to the one I live in. If I dropped into your head, I'd see colours differently. I'd smell things differently. I have different belief structures. Like, I'd watch different news. The world would look different. Like, everything is different in your experience of reality than mine. And so you are a parallel universe. And the only way I could possibly know about your parallel universe is to see your creative expression. So I want to read your books and hear your stories and know about your world for me to be able to have any access to that universe. And that's what we're kind of sharing with each other. But yeah, and it means that you're, you know, not all about you. It's like you only get one chance to find out about these other universes that are around you. You're here for a short time, and all these people are just passing you by every day, and you've got no idea what's going on in their reality.
It's a beautiful perspective because oftentimes, I mean, it's really easy to find differences and point out differences. And it's also, so when we focus on what is similar, we find our common ground. But then to your point that once you talk to people and it's the only real way to gain empathy, and then also to gain understanding that it's not black and white. It's not my way or their way. There's all these various colors. And it's like, okay, if we're going to evolve as a species, if there's going to be, long lasting peace, if we're going to save the environment, it's almost like that's at the crux of it all, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the task.
And it comes back to the circle, because the circle is a ball. It's not actually a circle, and the ball is the whole universe. So we're on an Earth, but we're also in a universe that used to fit in the size of a melon, and that melon blew up and is still expanding now. And everything in that universe, every human being that ever has been and ever will be, and every plant, every tree, everything is in that universe. We all share the same infinity, so we are literally all one, like melon that blew up. We are all one. And
Wow.
It's like you go into that circle behind you and you keep going back and we all join together. So it's like, I like the idea of like some kind of cosmic being is lying on his back with his fingers in a load of finger puppets, like making up some soap opera, which is called life. And every now and then he catches himself, and that's the fool. So the moment of foolishness, the fool is when you realize that it's all made up and you're just entertaining yourself. And then you go back to it and like fight wars and like have families and, and get obsessed with your play again.
Wow. I love it. I love that. So tell me about, I want to talk about your creative work, and tell me a little bit about the play. You wrote a play called Sisterhood, and you've been touring throughout the UK. Tell me a little bit about the premise and, how did you come up with the idea?
So I had an incredibly profound experience at an ayahuasca ceremony 2 years ago, which was with a shaman who I went to when I was in my early 20s, because I'd had an abortion that had made me really ill. Just everything in my body started shutting down. And a friend of mine suggested, he'd been in South America recently and he knew there was a psychoactivity conference happening in Holland. And he said, if you were to go along and experience an ayahuasca ceremony, it might help you. And if you do, I'll pay for it. But I'm going to make a documentary about it and follow your story. So I went with him and did that. And it was absolutely brilliant and completely sorted me out. You have to do the work. It's not like it just does it for you. But I had to go through this whole ceremony and had an amazing healing experience with this shaman who did this whole ceremony on me. He's from the Kugi tribe in Colombia. And we stayed in touch for, I think it was 15 years in the end. So we stayed in touch with each other very loosely through his apprentice, who was from Holland. And then out of nowhere, really, I just suddenly got an email from the apprentice saying, would you be up for just coming to a ceremony? Because I never really had the money to come. It's quite expensive to go and do off your own back. And I'm a struggling artist who's been living as an artist for 17 years and just about managing it. So I managed to get by, but I never have like some spare money to be able to go to Colombia or anything like that. And they were coming to Holland and he said, do you want to come along to a ceremony? And I was like, wow, yeah. And what was amazing was I was in a really good place. Like I wasn't going for any reason. I'd been on quite a crazy journey because I met my husband and we started trying for children and realised we couldn't have children, and so did IVF for about 4 or 5 years, and it never ended up working. So in terms of my own journey with the Fool, the moment where I had to let go of like the idea of what my future was with having children and like plan A, plan B, all those sort of things, I had to let them all go and I had to step off the cliff into the unknown and literally take that fool's journey. I was like, okay, I will now just do whatever the universe wants me to do. And I had to just let myself be led, because everything that I thought I was going to do wasn't happening. And other than suicide,
what was that like when in that
it
moment?
It was full on. Yeah. I mean, I was really suicidal and fully in depression for a few years, like probably about, well, I mean, it was a 7-year chapter. It was one of my 7-year chapters. But yeah, I mean, basically 7 years of just horror, crying in the toilets every day and just and then the moment we found out, I mean, it's rubbish. It's a horrible journey to go through, and my heart goes out to anyone who's experiencing it. But the moment we found out the final round hadn't worked, I was just like, okay, because I knew we weren't going to carry on because we were going to have to pay for it because we were getting it free on the NHS. We got 3 rounds free. and we wouldn't have been able to afford to carry on after that. So I just had to let it go. And the moment we did, it literally felt like stepping off a cliff. And instead of falling, I flew. And you just have to let yourself go. And it was amazing, actually. Ever since then, everything I've ever wanted has happened. Like, I wanted to make theatre, I wanted to be a creative person, I wanted to be a writer. And before, I was sort of trying to do it in what felt like this mainstream way, where I was trying to figure it out in the way that you do in your 20s, where you think things are going to like pan out the way you think they're going to be. And then nothing had ended up being the way I thought it was going to be. And then when I let go and let the universe lead, literally everything happened, but it didn't look anything like how I thought it was going to look. So it's just been an adventure, because I'm like, oh, this is exciting.
Well, that's a really amazing story. It's interesting how, as humans, we try to manage when we're going to have the breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't manage that.
No,
like, as
really
humans,
can't.
we're like, okay, I need to have a breakthrough. I want to have the breakthrough now. And it's almost like you have to be brought to the end of your rope.
You have to be brought to your knees.
Like you said, you can fly.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
and sometimes beyond.
I was a massive planner. I had everything laid out. I knew exactly when I was doing everything. It's how I make things happen. I've always been, a doer, but that also was my biggest kind of chain around my neck, I realized.
So when you wrote Sisterhood, was that what it was about?
Yeah. So what happened was, about 2 or 3 years after this experience, the shaman asked me to go to this ceremony, and I turned up, and it was in a red and yellow circus tent. Someone had built him a circus tent, and I was just like, this is my church. Like, this is the best church ever. This is amazing.
Yes.
Like, literally, that's my dream. And there was a sacred fire pit in the middle, and he hugged me like an old friend. I'd only seen him this once, and he just, and he now could speak English, which was brilliant. So we were able to communicate with each other. And I'd written a book about I wrote a book when I was 28, which was kind of capturing some of the first ayahuasca experience I had with him. So I gave him a copy of my book, and I was like, oh, this has been published. And it was just really lovely to catch up with him again. And then we did this ceremony, and he dedicated the night to the divine feminine. And it was absolutely incredible. It was so different to the experience I'd had before, where there was quite a lot of men sort of being bolshy, and they were like tending to the fire and all that kind of stuff. It was so gentle. And he was saying, oh, it's to the divine feminine who's Mother Earth, but also to all the women who are here tonight who are embodiments of her. And I absolutely felt the goddess in me. It was mind-blowing. I saw a gold beam of light shoot down through the tent and hit all the women in the tent, and we all atomized and turned into queen bees. We were these like gold pulsing larvae type things that were just sex, and were just reproducing, and were just orgasming. And I basically was orgasming for about an hour, just like having a wonderful time. It was absolutely incredible.
Fabulous church. Great.
It's like, this is great. I like this. I'll come here again. I had this amazing experience.
At what point in time are we right now? When was this?
This is like
how many years ago?
2017, I think it was. So it was like,
so just a few years ago. So
yeah.
like you said, the ayahuasca experience before was fairly masculine. I'm just trying to have a reference point in terms of where I think, collectively, and I'm assuming that you're along this thinking, but that, we've seen this amazing resurgence in conversations about the divine feminine and kind of the relevancy of that. And it's come very quickly, right?
Yeah.
It's been something that kind of came rushing in and is really, I don't want to say taking over, because that's a very masculine way of putting it, but it's like, we're seeing little seeds sprouting everywhere of this.
Yeah. So my artist's version of this is that we've woken mum up. Like, mum's upstairs. So it's the 21st century, right? So we're 21 now, and we've been partying, we've been messing around. The 1800s was like, Industrial Revolution was acme, and we've been making a mess, and we've been doing whatever the hell we want for our teens. And now we're 21, and we've been making loads of noise, and mum's now woken up, and she's coming downstairs, and she's going to absolutely screw us if we don't clean up quick and sort this mess out. And I think the way that that's manifesting is that the women have woken up and are rolling up their sleeves and going, hang on a minute, what? We're all about to die. Is everyone like, okay, guys, you definitely were driving because no one else was allowed, and so you have to sort this out now. Like, you have to let us also take the steering wheel. You need to let poor people and black people and everyone else take the steering wheel, and we need to guide this onto safe waters, because you can't carry on heading towards that iceberg. We're going to all go. So that's not happening anymore.
Yeah. And it's like, she's going to be just fine. We're the ones that aren't.
She's going to chuck us out and we're going to find that we've got nowhere to go, so it is literally like that kind of quick, like sort it out before mum catches us feeling happening. So yeah, I basically, and that all came from this ceremony as well. So I saw a thing like a web around the world called the Worldwide Women's Web. And so I just saw this web that was lighting up gold, and I could see little dewdrops all over it that were lighting up, and then they were spreading to the ones next to them and lighting them up. And that was the feminine waking up across the planet. And the idea being that we can't have like a knight in shining armor come in to get us, because they can be chopped down too easily. We need to work as a web and as a community where we all stand up together at the same time, because then they can't chop us down. So we have to work together, and we have to be equals, and for us to be resilient, that needs to happen.
So did sisterhood start out as a circle play, or did it start? And then I know you've said you're publishing the book right now. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, when I came back from this ceremony, all that was in my head was that I had the name Sisterhood. I was like, right, I need to write a play called Sisterhood. And I knew I wanted to make it with this woman, Andrea Brooks, who's my mentor, and a girl called Cara, who I met at this reenactment, who I mentor to. So she's 20, I'm 40, and Andrea's 60. And I was like, okay, so it's about the generations, and it's about mentorship and female stewardship, and us passing on wisdom to each other, because we don't really do that anymore in our society. We're all separated into our peer groups. So that was the starting point. I came back from that ceremony knowing that that's what I wanted to do. And I managed to get funding from the Arts Council in England. So I applied to get some funding, and I got funding to do it. And I hired a cottage, and it was literally just going on Airbnb and seeing where was available and finding somewhere nice for us to go. And I found this thatched cottage in a beautiful little village just outside of Brighton. And we went there. And when we arrived, Andrea said, oh my God, there's a really beautiful church up the road with an ancient yew tree in the churchyard. We should go there and see it. And we went up there. And we were sitting in the church, and there was a beautiful stained glass window with a phoenix on it, because there'd been a fire and they'd smashed the glass, the fire had smashed the glass, and then they'd redone it and put this phoenix in there to show it kind of coming back from the ashes. And while we were sat there, Andrea said, do you know that back in the day, if a village didn't have a lockup or a kind of police cell type thing, then they would lock people in the church, because that would be the only safe building they could do that in. So if anyone had been accused of witchcraft, they would have been locked in a church overnight until the magistrate arrived. And we sat there in silence for a bit, and then we're like, that's the play. And Andrea also said this amazing thing where she's like, the play is trying to tell itself, like it's already here in the ether. We're the components for it, but we just need to let it through. And so in the end, the play was about 3 women aged 60, 40 and 20 who are locked in a church cell in Wilmington, in this village. And in the morning, they know they're going to face their trial for witchcraft. And it's about them getting each other through the night. So it's about them supporting each other.
Oh, it gives me chills.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And he did an improvisation. So we put ourselves in the kind of pantry in this cottage where we moved all the stuff out, and we locked ourselves in with a tape recorder, and someone sat and observed us, and we improvised the play. And pretty much, I mean, everything we said is in the play. I then added to it and kind of developed it. But the whole play is basically from this improvisation that we did that night after being in church.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that. I love hearing the different types of creative process, because I totally agree with you that for me, that same experiences, I've just found that creativity it's my mode of spirituality now. And it's the one thing that I feel like is not dogmatic and it's free flowing. And so it's just so beautiful to hear the process, and then just how, sometimes the creative process can be so painstaking, and I'm sure that there's been layers to it, but that it can also come in in like a lightning bolt of creativity. It's like the 3 of you get together. It's truly a symphony of collaboration, which is really where I see it going, right? In the future, I just see it's like, that's how we survive is collaboration. It's not this like, put that one person out front. It's that, what's your personal brand? I mean, I know that there is an element of that in terms of capitalism and how people market themselves. But to me, it rings so true. It feels so healing. It's like, I would love to see that. And anyway, so from there, did you record it? Does it change every time? Is it something that is malleable and moves? Tell me a little bit more about that.
We recorded it, and I turned it into a script. So it's the same, it's a script. It's the same play each time when we do it. But there's a bit, we break the fourth wall. So all three of us at some point break the fourth wall. We have, I love neon. So I always have neon in plays, just if I can get away with it. So even though we're all in Tudor clothes and it's like 16th century clothes, this neon light comes on and we've got neon tribal makeup and these neon balls of wool, and we throw them into the audience and hold the string whilst we tell a story that's about us, our real story. And so I tell the story about not being able to have children, and my character in the play is barren, and that's why her husband's leaving her there to be killed as a witch, because then he can get rid of her and get a new wife. So I tell the story from my perspective now of not being able to have children, and the younger girl talks about abuse. Well, she's from there was a family of alcoholism and growing up where that, she was having to be the parent to her parents. And then the older woman is talking about her not having children, her going through the menopause and being invisible and not fitting in with anything. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have any of the things that you're meant to have by the time you're an old woman. Not the 60s old, but, by the time you've passed your menopause. Yes, we all share our stories, and then it reflects into how things have changed in 500 years, but some things haven't changed. And so you see the lineage and the history of what's happening.
Oh my gosh. It sounds so powerful.
So that's kind of fixed. It's a really hard play to perform. It's quite
can
hardcore.
imagine.
But then we do the healing ceremonies afterwards. So with the tour that we just did, we went to all the places where Matthew Hopkins, the witch finder general, who killed 60% of the witches in England.
Oh my gosh.
Before he died at 27. So he killed all these witches when he was like 24, 25, 26.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a serial killer, and he got away with it.
Yeah, that's what he was. Exactly.
Yeah. So we went to all the places where he killed and executed and tortured women and men, and we performed the play in actual, like in situ, so in castles, in museums, like actual spaces that were these old spaces where he was. There was two bridges where there were ducking stalls, and we performed in like the nearest pub or inn where we could, that was near to it. And we performed in the actual inn where he first pulled his neighbour out by the hair, Elizabeth Clark, and accused her of being a witch. And that's what began the whole thing. So in each place, it was quite full on for us to be doing it there. And we then did a ceremony at the end. And what was interesting is the area of the country where we do this is called East Anglia, and it's where I'm from. And it's got a reputation for being, quite working class, but also like they're the sort of people that will think you're weird really easily, so when I was growing up, I was a weirdo and, all that kind of stuff. And so I got away from there as soon as I could. And so for me, there was quite a bit of fear in going back there to perform this play, because I thought they're going to find it weird and I didn't know what the reaction was going to be. And I was blown away by how much people got it. I mean, obviously the sort of people who are going to come and see theatre are already going to be a bit more open-minded possibly than
open-minded.
Yeah. But there were people that were like, like more upper middle class, like richer people who were older. There were younger people who, looked like they had nice nails and nice hair and everything, the sort of people that will look after themselves and are kind of not your sort of obvious witchy alternative people. And it was a real mixture. Like it wasn't just your obvious sort of liberal people there, and everyone really got it. I was absolutely gobsmacked, and it's left me feeling very hopeful about how beyond the media smokescreen, people really are waking up and their hearts are in the right place, and everyone's hopeful for a better future. And I just feel like this kind of cuts through politics, because it doesn't matter whether you're liberal or conservative. If you care about the environment and you care about women and equality, like it kind of is outside of that, women being able to express themselves and not feel intimidated, and like that's not really in the world of politics at the moment, it feels like. So that it was just really wonderful. I was totally inspired. And so the ceremony at the end, we held stones. So we had a black stone and a white stone, and the white stone was for people that have been oppressed that we want to remember and honour that evening, and then the black stone was for people who inspired us, who we wanted to honour. And then we put them in the middle, and everyone went round, and someone cried in every ceremony. Like it really made people get emotional, and they were openly.
And when you mean everyone, you're talking about the audience that was there was a part of the ceremony?
Yeah. So we invited the
Wow.
audience to stay.
So you
Not everybody
perform the
did,
play
but
and then you invite them. Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah.
So continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, so and it's in these spaces, so these like heavy spaces where there was torture and stuff, and so we then honoured and remembered, and then we sang to them, and we had prayer bowls, and we would sound a prayer bowl around the stones, and then we would all sing a note, and we would like kind of harmonise, and then I had a sweepy it's like a horse's tail thing from Ethiopia that kind of flies away normally, but I used that to like sweep the air and clean the air. And then we then talked about Matthew Hopkins and how I'd read a list out of whoever had been killed in that place. So in each town, I read a list of all of the witches that we were honouring and remembering in each place. And then Matthew Hopkins, when we were trying to work out what we wanted to say to him or what our intention was for the tour, I spent about 6-7 months trying to think what I wanted to get out of it in that way. And then I couldn't come up with anything. And so as a group, me and the 3 other performers, we sat in a circle and we decided to pull a tarot card, and we pulled the Wheel of Fortune. But this particular tarot deck had 3 women at the top, 3 women at the bottom, and then 3 women at the sides in between the spokes. And it was kind of like chakra colours. And the women at the bottom were all in the dark blues, and they looked like they were in absolute pain and misery. And they looked like 3 women accused of witchcraft. And then the 3 women in the top spokes looked like they were full of light. It was in yellow and gold colours, and they were fully in their power. And it was so perfect. It was like, oh my goodness. So Hopkins existed, and he put women through this part of the circle, which is the winter, the darkness, the hard times, the destruction part of it. But then we've come through that, and now we are going into spring and summer, and we're coming into our power. And so even though the world at the moment feels like it's going into winter, women and the sisterhood feels like it's going into summer. And so it reminds us that nothing lasts forever. Hopkins is no longer here, and that people that we feel are despots and dictators and oppressors that are in the world at the moment are not going to be here forever. And so things are going to move on. And whatever darkness it feels like we're entering into at the moment is necessary for new things to come. But new things will come. Like, we will get through this, and there will be summer again.
Very appropriate for Scorpio season right now.
Exactly.
We just finished recording an episode on Scorpio and talking about transformation and just that death, rebirth, life cycle of transformation.
Yeah.
So have you ever been met with skepticism while doing this work? And if so, what do you say to the skeptics?
Do you know what? On the whole, I haven't really. I think what happens is, obviously, I only really attract. I mean, I think this is the thing with not being famous in any way, which is really good. I have a massive ego, and I'm a Capricorn, and I'm ambitious, and I thought that I was set for stardom, and that was part of my thing with this Fool's Journey. Like, I really did think that I was going to be like some famous person in some capacity, and which is completely egotistical, but it was like, that was just part of my makeup. That was who I am. And my journey of like things not working out the way I thought they would. I was working in a call center at 35 and not being able to have children. And that was like, as well as not being able to have kids, that was plan B. Plan A was be rich and famous. Plan B was have kids. So I literally didn't have a plan C. And so for me, I find that I don't meet with skepticism because I'm not in any way famous enough to be getting trolled, or I'm not getting any hassle from anybody where I'm at the moment with my work. And because I put stuff out there for people to come and see, they're choosing to come and see it. So not everyone in the audience is necessarily going to enjoy it, and they don't necessarily hang around for the ceremony afterwards. But I also don't really hear from them like they didn't enjoy it and they go, and that's fine. You're not going to enjoy every play you see, are you?
You made a really great point too, where you talk about, there's an element of like collected wisdom, right? Like you said, you were 40 years old, and it's like at this stage in life, you're not as shook by any of that anyway, right?
No.
Like your roots are deep, and you've created this almost like vortex of attraction where it's like you're doing the work and you're focusing on the work, and like the audiences are showing up, and people are, the work is I just keep imagining almost like a snowball that's gaining traction down the hill kind of a thing, It's really beautiful the way that you tell the story. I would love to see this in the United States. I know we talked briefly. I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask our listeners or talk to our listeners about how they can reach you, and what your hopes, like what do you see or hope for the future for this work?
Yeah. So one of them is that I'd like to bring sisterhood to Salem. So I would absolutely love to bring the play to Salem and to come around America in general. I think it would be interesting to think about oppression. So many different types of people are being oppressed all the time. And so looking at oppression through the prism of history is a useful way of doing it, because it distances, it feels like no one's pointing the finger at anyone now, but it means that you can reflect on what's happening. So, but I would absolutely love to bring sisterhood to Salem. So if there was any way of doing that, because part of the thing we realized with the witch trials that we were doing was it was Hopkins's book that was the inspiration for the Salem witch trials. So there's a direct connection to the hysteria that happened in the UK that then led to the hysteria that happened in Salem. So it feels like it would be powerful to take the play over to Salem and kind of carry on the work there.
Absolutely.
Then,
or do an American tour.
Yeah,
which in general, I think you might be surprised how many people would really resonate with the work.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And I think, so it would be really interesting to try and bring the Fooling over to the US as well. I mean, I think with everything, it's always to do with, you have to work out financially, logistically, how to make this work. But it would be wonderful to try and get Jonathan Kay and the Academy over to the States. And because what we would do is you get something going that people then could manage themselves. So we do this in Europe. Yes. So there's a group in Berlin that kind of self-manage, and they got the work going, and then we go out there for a week. Like each person who's from the previous reincarnation of the Academy goes out there for 1 week and teaches. So it's not financial pressure on any one person to go and do it. So there are ways of doing it that we can kind of work with people and pass it on if anyone has a residential space or anything that they'd be interested in doing. And then if you want to follow my work, I'm on all social media. I've got a Patreon account as well where I'm supporting people with creativity. So if anyone wants to get one-to-one support, I can do that, or they can just be part of a collective where I'm kind of throwing things out as I have ideas or think about.
And where specifically can they find you? Like, what's your handle, and how can they reach you?
My Patreon is Jolie Booth, so that's JoliebBooth. So that's my name, Jolie Booth. And I'm Jolie Booth on Amazon for my books. So if you look me up, you can find my 2 novels that are part of a series called Saturn Returns, which is where I'm writing a book every 7 years, where I'm capturing what happens in these chapters in my life. And then I just wrote Sisterhood, the play, into a novel. So I've just turned that into a novel, and that's just come out literally today. Amazon sent me the email through saying that it's available now.
Oh my gosh.
So that's happened.
Congratulations. That's wonderful. What are the titles of the other 2 books?
The first one I wrote when I was 28, which is called The Girl Who Ruled the World. And the second one was when I was 35, when I'd just gone through the IVF fertility journey, and that's called Never Worn.
Beautiful. And I really acknowledge you for being so open and raw and sharing those highly personal moments of your life and really turning them into medicine for other people, and being able to speak about it in such an eloquent and beautiful way. I know I've been inspired just listening to you talk. Mm-hmm. And just before we part, I want to make sure that everyone knows how they can reach you on Instagram. Yeah. Are you on Instagram and Facebook?
So I've got an arts company, which is what my handle is for everything, which is called Kriya Arts, which is KRIYAARTS. Kriya is like the opposite of karma. So karma is the repetition of patterns, and Kriya is the moment where you go, right, screw this, I'm doing something different. So Kriya is the kind of eureka moment where you have an epiphany and change things. So it's Kriya Arts, and that's on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and everything like that.
Well, Jolie, thank you so much for spending this time with me and with our listeners. And we just really appreciate you sharing your path and being such an inspirational, open person.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely to speak to you. I absolutely love this podcast. I'm really chuffed to be here.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.